Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be diving into one of the
Okay.
most famous philosophical arguments ever,
Okay.
Plato's Crito. You interested in sort of exploring how different philosophical ideas can clash, and Crito really delivers on that.
It does.
So to quickly refresh your memory, this dialogue takes place after Socrates has been sentenced to death by an Athenian court,
Right.
and his friend Crito visits him in prison with a pretty daring proposition, escape.
Escape.
But Socrates isn't so quick to jump on board.
Of course.
This sets up a fascinating conflict between Crito's practical pleas and Socrates' unwavering commitment to his principles.
It really does.
And it makes you wonder, what would you do in that situation? Would you choose freedom even if it meant compromising your beliefs?
It's a question that I think forces us to confront the tension between our personal desires and our sense of moral obligation. What makes Crito so compelling is that both sides of the argument have valid points.
Right, on one hand, you have Crito, who's understandably frantic. He's losing a dear friend. He's worried about the social stigma. And he even argues that Socrates has a duty to his children to stay alive.
Right.
He even throws in this guilt trip, saying, "For if you die, I shall not only lose a friend who can never be replaced, but people who do not know you and me will believe that I might have saved you if I had been willing to give money, but that I did not care."
Wow. Crito's arguments definitely tug at the heartstrings. He's not just being selfish, he's genuinely concerned about the well-being of Socrates and those around him. But it's important to note that he also frames his appeal in terms of reputation and public perception.
It's interesting. It seems like he's appealing to both Socrates' emotions and his sense of social responsibility. But beyond the emotional appeal, Crito has also put together a practical plan, right?
He has.
He's got money, safe houses in other cities, and he makes the escape sound pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
He even tells Socrates, "There are persons who at no great cost are willing to save you and bring you out of prison, and Cebes and many others are willing to spend their money too."
Wow.
I mean, with all that in place, it almost seems irresponsible for Socrates to not escape.
Yes, Crito presents a compelling case, and his assurances probably would have tempted many in Socrates' position. But we can't forget the historical context. Athenian law was very different from what we have today. Defying it carried serious consequences, not just for the individual, but for those who aided them. Escaping wouldn't just make Socrates a fugitive, it could potentially put Crito and others in legal jeopardy.
So even though Crito minimizes the risks, there's this underlying tension between individual action and the rule of law.
Exactly.
It's starting to feel less like a simple escape plan and more like a challenge to the very foundation of Athenian society.
Right.
How does Socrates respond to all of this?
Well, what's fascinating is that Socrates doesn't dismiss Crito's concerns out of hand. He actually engages with them quite thoughtfully. Instead of getting swept up in the emotion, he dissects each argument using logic and reason to expose the flaws in Crito's thinking. He even asks, should public opinion even matter when it comes to questions of justice and morality?
So he's not just saying no to escape.
No.
He's prompting a deeper discussion about the relationship between individual conscience and the demands of society.
Yes.
He's making Crito think about the bigger picture, the underlying principles at stake. That's pretty bold considering he's facing his own death.
It is.
What's an example of how Socrates uses logic to counter Crito's arguments?
One of the most memorable moments is when Socrates uses the analogy of a gymnast and his trainer. He argues that a gymnast shouldn't be swayed by the cheers or jeers of the crowd, but should instead focus on the expert opinion of his trainer.
Ah, that's right. And then Socrates brilliantly applies that analogy to the concept of justice. He's essentially saying, when it comes to moral questions, who is the expert we should listen to? The uninformed masses, or our own internal sense of right and wrong? It's like he's flipping the script on Crito, asking him, whose opinion do you value more, the crowd's or the expert's?
Exactly. And that's where it starts to get really interesting. By shifting the focus from practicality to principle, Socrates is forcing Crito and us to confront some uncomfortable questions about how we make decisions in our own lives. Are we swayed by popular opinion, or do we have the courage to stand by our convictions even when it's unpopular?
So it's not just a philosophical debate.
No.
It's a personal challenge. And it seems like this challenge goes even deeper than just personal conviction. Doesn't Socrates also introduce this whole idea of a good life? What does he mean by that?
That's where we start to see the core of Socrates' philosophy. He argues that a life lived unjustly, even if it means physical survival, is ultimately not worth living. It's not just about avoiding punishment. It's about living in accordance with what's right.
So it's not just about staying alive.
No.
It's about living a life that's true to your values. But how does he reconcile that with the fact that he's been sentenced to death by the very society he claims to uphold?
To really drive home this point, Plato uses a brilliant literary device. He has Socrates Imagine a dialogue with the laws of Athens themselves.
Wait, the laws are talking. That sounds intense. How does that even work?
Well, these laws are personified, so they speak directly to Socrates, accusing him of betraying his social contract by trying to escape.
Hold on, social contract? You're going to have to break that down for me. That sounds a little heavy.
Sure, in ancient Athens, the social contract was this unwritten agreement. Citizens agreed to abide by the laws in exchange for the protection and benefits of living in the city. By choosing to remain in Athens all his life, Socrates is seen as having accepted this contract. Now, by trying to escape the laws, are arguing that he's breaking that agreement.
So if I'm understanding this right, the laws are basically guilt-tripping Socrates,
Yeah.
saying, hey, you've benefited from living here all these years, so now you have to play by our rules. Even if you think they're unfair, that's a tough position to be in, especially when your life is on the line.
It definitely highlights the inherent tension between individual rights and the demands of the state. And you can see how this concept of the social contract,
Right.
even though it originated in ancient Athens,
Yeah.
still resonates today.
Absolutely. I mean, think about modern society. We pay taxes in exchange for public services like
Right?
roads, schools, police protection.
Yeah.
It's like an unspoken agreement.
Yeah.
We contribute to the system,
Right.
and in return, the system provides certain benefits and protections.
Right.
But what happens when we feel like that system is failing us?
Yeah.
Or when the rules seem unjust?
Right.
That's where things get complicated.
And that's exactly the dilemma that Socrates is wrestling with in Crito.
Yeah.
He's acknowledging the validity of the social contract, but he's also questioning its limits. Is there ever a point where individual conscience should supersede the dictates of the state?
That's a question for the Aphorns, isn't it? But going back to Socrates' idea of the good life,
Yeah.
it seems like he's suggesting there's a higher moral standard
Yes.
than just following the rules.
Yes, and this is where we start to see the true depths of Socrates' philosophy. For him, the good life isn't about wealth status or even physical survival. It's about living a life that's aligned with your principles, a life guided by reason and justice. And in this case, he believes escaping would be a betrayal of those principles.
So he's not just choosing to die, he's making a statement
Yes.
about what it truly means to live a principled life. It's almost like he's saying, what's the point of freedom if you've compromised your integrity to get it?
Right.
But wouldn't it be more practical to escape and then work to change the system from the outside?
Right.
Couldn't he have a greater impact by continuing to teach and inspire others?
That's a very interesting point, and one that many people have debated over the centuries.
Okay.
Some argue that Socrates could have achieved more good by living to fight another day. But Socrates believes that true justice isn't about achieving a specific outcome. It's about adhering to principles, even when it's difficult. He sees his decision to stay as an act of moral consistency, a testament to the idea that principles should guide our actions regardless of the consequences.
So he's making a point not just with his words,
Yeah,
but with his actions.
exactly.
He's embodying his philosophy. But I'm still grappling with this idea of breaking the law. Isn't there a point where civil disobedience becomes necessary, especially when the laws themselves are unjust?
That's a valid question, and one that has been debated by philosophers and activists throughout history. Even today, we see examples of people choosing to break laws they deem unjust, from peaceful protests to acts of civil disobedience. Socrates was certainly aware that laws can be flawed, and he wasn't advocating for blind obedience.
So how do we reconcile that with his decision to stay in prison? How does he square that circle?
Socrates emphasizes the importance of respecting the established legal system, arguing that undermining it would lead to chaos and instability. However, he also believed in the power of persuasion, of reasoned discourse to bring about change. He saw his trial, even though it resulted in his condemnation, as an opportunity to engage in philosophical debate and challenge prevailing views. He believed that even if you disagree with a particular law, there are ways to challenge it within the existing framework rather than resorting to outright defiance.
So he's suggesting a more nuanced approach.
Yes.
You can disagree, you can challenge,
Right.
but you should work within the system to try to improve it.
Yes.
It's almost like he's saying, don't just tear it all down, find a way to make it better.
Right.
But wasn't he condemned because he was challenging the status quo?
Yes.
Wasn't that what got him into trouble in the first place?
That's a crucial point. Socrates' unwavering commitment to truth and his willingness to question authority were certainly factors in his trial. He made powerful enemies by challenging their beliefs and exposing hypocrisy.
So on the one hand, he's advocating for working within the system.
Right.
And on the other hand, his very existence is a challenge to that system. That's fascinating. But ultimately, he chooses to accept the consequences of his actions, even though he believes he's innocent.
Exactly, and this is where we see the depth of his commitment to his principles. He believes that true courage isn't about defying the law for personal gain, but but about upholding the rule of law even when it's personally costly. He's willing to sacrifice his own life to demonstrate the importance of respecting the social contract.
I'm starting to see how this goes far beyond just a legal debate.
Yes.
This is about integrity, about standing by your convictions even when facing death.
Right.
And it raises an interesting question. Wouldn't fleeing have been a more courageous act? It takes guts to go against the grain, to defy the system.
That's a provocative thought, and it gets to the heart of what we consider courageous. Is it more courageous to resist to fight for survival, or to accept an unjust fate in the name of a higher principle? Is there a point where practicality should override principle, where self-preservation outweighs moral duty?
These are questions that are still relevant today, aren't they? I mean, think about whistleblowers who risk their careers to expose wrongdoing, or activists who face imprisonment for challenging unjust laws. Where do we draw the line between personal responsibility and social obligation?
And Crito doesn't offer easy answers.
Right.
It's precisely because it grapples with these complexities that it continues to be such a powerful and thought-provoking work. It challenges us to consider these questions in our own lives, to examine our values, and to think critically about our relationship to authority.
It's definitely making me reevaluate my own priorities, knowing what we know about Socrates' life and philosophy. His decision to stay and face death almost feels inevitable. Like it's the only choice he could have made that wouldn't have felt like a betrayal of everything he stood for. But it's still such a powerful and complex situation.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do we know how Crito reacted to all of this?
Unfortunately, Crito doesn't tell us how Crito felt or what he did after this conversation. We can only imagine the emotional turmoil he must have experienced witnessing his friend choose death over freedom. But I think it's safe to say that this encounter would have left a lasting impression on him, just as it has on countless readers and thinkers throughout history.
It definitely makes you wonder about the conversations they must have had afterward.
Yeah.
And about how Crito carried those lessons forward in his own life.
Right.
It's almost like Plato is inviting us to continue that conversation, to keep exploring these questions and to find our own answers.
Exactly. And that's what makes Crito such a timeless work. It's not just a historical document. It's a catalyst for ongoing dialogue and self-reflection. It challenges us to consider what it truly means to live a good life, to be a responsible citizen, and to stand by our principles in the face of adversity.
It's amazing how a text written thousands of years ago can still feel so relevant to our lives today. I'm eager to see what other insights we can uncover as we continue to explore this fascinating dialogue. Should we take a moment to gather our thoughts before diving into the final part of this deep dive? I feel like we've been through an emotional roller coaster with this dialogue.
Yeah.
Crito's desperation, Socrates' unwavering stance, the whole idea of the laws speaking.
Right.
It's intense. But you mentioned earlier that Crito is just one piece of a larger philosophical puzzle.
It is.
What did you mean by that?
Well, it's important to remember that Crito is just one of many dialogues that Plato wrote featuring Socrates.
Okay.
Each one delves into a different aspect of philosophy,
Right.
whether it's ethics, politics, or even metaphysics.
So it's like each dialogue is a window into a different room of Socrates' mind.
Yeah.
And Crito happens to focus on this particular clash
Yes.
between individual conscience and social responsibility.
Exactly.
What other themes does Socrates explore in these other dialogues?
Oh, there's so much to discover. In some dialogues, Socrates probes the nature of love, beauty, and knowledge. In others, he debates the meaning of justice, the best form of government, and even the nature of reality itself. He was a man of boundless curiosity, always pushing the boundaries of thought.
It sounds like there's a whole world of Socratic wisdom waiting to be explored.
There is.
But for now, let's bring it back to Crito.
Okay.
What are some key takeaways we can apply to our own lives,
Yeah.
even if we don't live in ancient Athens or face a death sentence?
One of the most enduring lessons from Crito is the importance of critical thinking.
Okay.
Socrates doesn't just accept what others tell him. He questions assumptions, analyzes arguments, and forces those around him to think deeply.
He's like the ultimate debate partner.
Yeah,
Always pushing for clarity, always seeking the truth, even if it's uncomfortable.
exactly. And that's a skill that's more relevant than ever in today's world. We're constantly bombarded with information, opinions, and competing narratives. It's so easy to just go along with whatever sounds good or confirms our existing beliefs. But Socrates challenges us to do the hard work of thinking for ourselves, of examining evidence, and of questioning what we hear.
It's like he's giving us a toolkit for navigating the information age.
Yes.
Don't just consume, question, analyze, synthesize. Become an active participant in the search for truth.
Another takeaway is the idea that our actions have consequences not just for ourselves,
Right.
but for the larger community. Socrates' decision to stay in prison, even though he believes he's innocent, is driven by his sense of duty to the laws and the social contract he feels bound by. He recognizes that his choices have implications for the stability and well-being of the whole society.
So it's not just about me and my rights.
No,
It's about recognizing that we're part of a larger web of relationships and responsibilities.
precisely. And even if we don't always agree with the laws or customs of our society, Crito encourages us to think carefully about the impact of our actions on others. It's a call for responsible citizenship, for considering the common good, even when it's difficult.
And this ties back to something we discussed earlier, that tension between individual freedom and social responsibility. It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
It certainly is. And Crito doesn't offer easy answers or a one-size-fits-all solution. It's more about raising the right questions, prompting us to reflect on our values and to find our own way to navigate that tension in a way that aligns with our principles.
But speaking of principles, I think the most powerful takeaway from Crito is the idea that we should strive to live in accordance with our values, even when it's challenging. Socrates' unwavering commitment to justice, even in the face of death, is such a profound example of integrity. It makes me wonder, would I have that kind of courage? Would I be willing to sacrifice so much for what I believe in?
Those are questions we all have to grapple with in our own lives, and I think that's the beauty of Crito. It doesn't just tell us what to think, it invites us to continue the conversation, to examine our own beliefs, and to challenge ourselves to live more authentically.
It's been an incredible journey exploring Crito with you. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on what it means to live a principled life.
I'm so glad to hear that.
And I really appreciate your insights today.
Well, thank you for having me.
I hope you'll join us again soon
I would love to.
for another deep dive into the world of ideas.
Absolutely.
To all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in to this deep dive into Plato's Crito. We hope you found it thought-provoking, and we encourage you to keep those conversations going.
Yes, keep thinking, keep questioning.
And keep exploring the power of ideas. Until next time, take care.
Bye, everyone.